You good?
Yep.
Well, good to see everybody. It's been a while. Certainly excited for next Thursday. I know the entire organization is looking forward to seeing the show Kansas City puts on. I'm sure it'll be a great show. A lot of buzz around the city, a lot of excitement around the building. Before we get started, I certainly want to thank my staff for all their hard work. It's since that Super Bowl parade, it's been combine meetings, combine free agency, back to combine meetings, and they've been really putting in the extra work up there along with the coaching staff. So can't thank them enough. And again, look forward to next week. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Hey, Brett, can you go into the major free agents you signed and what you liked about them and how you feel like they fit here? Taylor, Menahue, Edwards, Tranquil, Richie James?
Yeah, certainly. All good players. Starting off first with Jawan Taylor, just a guy that we liked from his days in college at Florida. Really athletic player. As we all know, he played right tackle in Florida predominantly. He had some snaps at left tackle, played right tackle in the NFL, but he's a guy athletically. I mean, he's long, quick feet, really efficient pass protector. And I think it wasn't a secret that once free agency started, a tackle was at the top of that list. And, we think we have great flexibility with him. He certainly wants the opportunity to play left, but I mean, if we were to draft a left tackle, I mean, we know what Jawan's tape looks like at right tackle there. So excited to get him. With Charles, having our roster set up where we're losing some guys at the time, and we'll see some of these guys are still out there, but like Frank and Carlos and Colin, we're a little bit depleted there on the defensive line. So I think Charles was a guy that made a lot of sense for us. He can play a lot of base end on early rundowns, but I think the thing that really appealed to us was his inside pass rush ability. He's long, he's athletic, and again, we just feel like pairing him with Chris Jones inside on third downs is something that will be really beneficial for us. Then you get to Mike Edwards. Mike Edwards was a guy that we actually have a lot of familiarity with. A couple years ago, when Matt House was here, we brought him from Kentucky. He was a DC at Kentucky. He coached Mike Edwards, and since then, Matt's now down at LSU. And once we started this free agency process, we talked to Matt and recalling his days at Kentucky, just the scheme fit here. And even though Spags doesn't run exactly what Matt did in Kentucky, there's a lot of carryover. So from an X and O standpoint, that just fit the bill with Juan leaving here and went to third safety. Made a lot of sense. And then the last one, sometimes it's just really good value with Drew Tranquil. I don't know if we went into free agency saying linebacker was a super high priority. I think we probably focused on the O&D line predominantly. But then as free agency goes, there's always some guys that for some reason or the other are just out there and they're really good players. And we just picked up communication because Drew Tranquil actually has the same agent as Juju. So when we were trying to work through that Juju situation, once we congratulated Juju's crew and his team of agents, we were made aware that Drew Tranquil was still out there and having had a lot of experience playing against him, knew how good he was, and a guy that can play all three positions. He can play Mike, he can wear the green dot and back up Bolton, he can play some Will, and he can play some on the line of scrimmage, great blitzer, great in pass coverage. So I think all three of those guys, four of those guys made sense for us, and I think they'll be really key additions.
What about Richie James?
Richie James too, and so again, he's got to play with Mike Kafka last year in that Dayball offense in New York. Versatile player, you can move him around a lot. Middle Tennessee State guy that we liked. Actually, I think a few years ago there was a trading deadline period when he was at the Niners. I think we actually tried to trade for him, one of those waiver wire cut day deals. But always liked the player. I think he's a versatile guy, and he also does punt returns too. And so we can take some pressure off of KT or Sky or whoever's back there. Just having another guy is something we think is a plus.
Brett, the number of people we expect or everybody expects to be here, particularly if it's good weather, 500,000, whatever it's going to be, how tough would it be to do the right football thing maybe, and that is trade out of the first round? How do you have a party and then not have the birthday cake?
I don't think it would be hard at all. I know there was a lot of joking last year about Clark saying you can't trade a pick, and listen, maybe there was some truth to it, but I think that applied more to in the off season or like last summer. We're here now, so I think a trade down is part of the draft, and it gives people more of a reason to come back on Friday and see us do even more work. But I think we're at the party now, so it's all it's all up in the air, and I think anything's a possibility.
Right, when it comes to the draft in totality, where do you see the value pockets in this year's class?
I think it's a good defensive back class. I think there's a lot of corners. I think it's, every year you go to the combine, you have a group of guys in one, a group of guys in two, and then usually they kind of work themselves up either, higher on a tier or lower on a tier. And it seems like all those guys in that second wave of corners went to the combine and ran 4.3. The numbers were crazy. These are all big, athletic, fast corners. I think it's a really good draft in the defensive backfield. I think there's depth late in the linebacker position. Tight end class is good. So I think it's on how you see the board, and every team will see it differently. And I think it may be viewed to some teams as really deep, because those are like if you need a DB, I think you think it's a really good class. And if you're pretty good at that position, you might say it's a thin class. But like every year, I mean, there'll be chances and opportunities to get guys in certain different rounds that make a lot of sense and you get really good value on. So we just have to be on point with our board like we have been in the past.
What do you make of just your wide receiver situation as it stands, and also just heading into the draft in this year's class there?
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of these positions. I think you always are looking to get more talent and get deeper. There's a lot of players we like, and certainly MVS and Sky and Tony brought Justin Watson back, Richie James. So we have really good players, and we can certainly go out there and line up and win games. But I'd say the same about the offensive line, the defensive line, and the receiver position. I mean, we're always looking to get deeper and more athletic and more talented. So, we're happy with the guys we have, but like every team in this draft, we can find ways to make our team better.
Brett, what led to Zay Flowers being able to do the workout with Pat? Obviously, Pat's been involved in the draft in previous years to some degree. How does that come about, and what do you feel like you gained with Pat's eyes even before the draft?
I think it has more to do with the power of Pat Mahomes. I mean, these guys it's funny because these guys are working out all over the country. And I think it's no secret Pat's down there on a college campus, and he's working out with pro players from other teams. He's working out with college players. I think some high school players are there. So these good players and the agents, they know where the good players are, and they connect and they have a workout. But, I don't think it was a secret. It wasn't like it was a private indoor facility that was closed off to the public. I mean, there was, I think, a documentary on Patrick going on right now. So there's a lot of cameras there, but no, it was just a really good job by the agent and the player to just get in contact with those guys and get in the throwing lines. And I think it was really smart by the kid and the agent. So, but Pat has a lot of fun with that. I think it's really cool that he's welcoming to all these guys, whether it be other players from other pro teams, college guys, or even high school guys. It's pretty cool that those guys get to say that they threw Pat Mahomes.
So what's Pat's advice about him? Draft him?
He has fun with all those guys. I mean, I don't know how much you can get from a 20-minute throwing session. Look quick, was in shape, but no, he likes it. And, I think there was a couple quarterbacks. I think, Niners had a quarterback down there too. So, but I think with players like that, I mean, you see them work out at the pro day at the combine, and I think it speaks more about the kids just wanting to just be around great players. And so that's certainly a positive.
How do you see the right tackle position as you guys currently have it, with the candidates being Yang, Winogo, and maybe Kennard?
Yeah, and I think that's how we see it, Pete. I think we have a lot of hopes for Lucas, and he was a guy that actually won that starting right tackle position. Then he got hurt. It's been a little bit of an uphill battle. He had a pretty bad injury there, but he has worked phenomenally to get in shape, and Rick and his staff has done a great job of continuing to get him in the right positions to go out there and be productive. And Prince is a guy that has always kind of steadily grown every year he's been here. And I think Kennard, I'm excited for him, and I think he'll have a chance to play some tackle. We certainly think he has flex, and he may end up being ultimately a better guard. He's played right tackle in the past, and he was a guy that, struggled a little early on, but I think toward the end of training camp there and throughout the season, you guys probably don't get to see as much during the season, but he's, I think, grown rapidly over the last few months. And I know Coach Heck is really excited for where he is. So, and again, I think he's a guy that has flexibility, so he'll probably get reps at both guard and tackle there. But between those three guys, and we have three solid guys that can go in there and compete, and I'm sure we'll look to continue to add depth all across that offensive line.
Brett, you haven't missed in previous drafts, to say that, but does that allow you not to be as conservative and possibly take some chances?
I think it's a good question. I think we'll have a list of guys that we'll feel like we want to be aggressive on, and if it works out number wise. And I think we'll sit there in 31 and we'll have a few guys. And if they're there and we think it's in range, reasonable, where we're not giving up a ton, I don't see us trading up too high in the draft or anything like that. But I mean, if there's a guy that we really like and we're in that range, and we'll sit here in the next few days here and determine what range we feel is comfortable for us. We'll sit there and potentially make that move, and we'll be content with staying there. I'm sure there'll be a good player there at 31, and then certainly be open to trading back if all those guys that we had in mind are gone. So I think we'll kind of see how it goes, and these things change so quickly and so fluidly. I mean, but I don't think we'd be opposed to being aggressive if we felt the player warranted.
Right, you mentioned Rick Burkhalter's name a second ago, and we know the NFLPA report came out. I know Coach Reed addressed it, that his name was mentioned. But also they talked about the facility. Coach talked about, well, we know 2031, you guys are going to be probably somewhere else. How often do you get an agent say to you when you're talking free agency, oh, my guy likes it, but your building's not good enough? Or we hear about, does that ever even come up, or is that something have you ever had an agent say, oh, we really like the building somewhere else? I mean, is that, or is it all dollars at your level?
It's probably all dollars. I'd honestly, I can't sit here and say an agent ever said, could go either way, but you guys need a new indoor. I don't think that ever happens. I think that what attracts players and agents here is coaching quarterback. And I think Arrowhead Stadium, and I think the great fans that we have. I think that agents may not see the indoor complex and may not know how to tier or stack that, but they see Arrowhead and the experience there. So I think when you have that stadium, the quarterback and the coach, I think we do okay with those kind of competitive battles.
Brett, you've got the deadline coming up on Clyde. Do you anticipate exercising that or no?
We have some time here. We'll see. I just think we'll go through the draft and we'll handle our business and just make smart decisions like we always do. I don't think we've reached a decision on anything yet, but safe to say that once we get through the draft, we'll look at our board, look at our off-season business that we have to attend to, some different players, and contract stuff, and we'll handle all of that after the draft.
Right, with everything that you've done with Spags over the past few years, now adding Joe Cullen into the mix, what are the traits that you like to see from defensive linemen, whether it's this year's class or just in general? And I guess how much is versatility high on the priority list? Yeah, the versatility is high on the list on really all across the board on both sides of the football at every position. I mean, guys, receivers that can play inside and outside, and tight ends that can be difference makers in the pass game, but also block. And as you mentioned with Steve, I mean, the intelligence factor though, and Steve, every coach wants smart players, but I don't know if I've ever been around a coach that puts that premium at the highest level. And he wants guys that he wants to do a lot of different things, very much like coach on the offensive side. I mean, he wants to do a lot of different things. He wants to give a lot of different looks. He wants to disguise a lot of different coverages, and he wants these guys to be all on the same page and all in tune and be ready to fly and be ready to play fast. And but I mean, obviously there'd be certain traits with running his scheme and playing 4 down, being long, athletic, and what have you. But certainly just the intelligence factor is, and the standard that we set there is that makes it tricky a little bit in the draft because like Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis are great examples. I mean, those guys were great players, but those guys, I mean, could be coaches in down the line. I mean, they're so smart and they're so dedicated. But no, I mean, Steve likes guys that are tough, versatile, smart, and certainly you want to come to work every day.
Right. Last year, one of your needs, going into the draft, you really stacked numbers at it as far as defensive backs. Was that the way it fell, or was that some sort of strategic maneuver you made going into the draft? And just what did you learn from that you might be able to apply going forward too? Yeah,
I think it was kind of a mindset. I think we value that position, and I know that there was some joking in the past that we didn't value the position and we'll just find them late. And I think it really speaks more to us. Listen, it's a good problem to have, but we pick late, and sometimes those corners aren't there. Either the draft doesn't have the numbers, or the guys that fall later in rounds 1 or 2 just maybe for some reason don't fit a medical or character. But I think it just kind of double down on the the mindset that we have, that it is important, and you do have to throw numbers at this, and let's really go to work on these 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounds. And there's other players, other positions that for some reason or the other, it just didn't work out at corner. if we have opportunities like we did last year with McDuffie, like we're going to do it because we value that position. If we're unable to get a corner, we know how hard those guys are to find and how expensive they are in free agency. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that was part of the process here. Let's throw numbers at this, and let's work with the coaches. Let's take a pocket of corners and let's really condense those numbers down, give them to the coaches, and have really good dialogue here, and not be afraid to take multiple guys.
How much does that apply to like a different position, like as far as, you get 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round and look at what you drafted already in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round? There's, I guess, are you wanting to
Have that mindset all across.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think the premium positions, O-line, D-line, corners. I think all those guys, but also too, I think it works in tandem with the draft and how deep these positions are throughout the board. And last year, it was the running back position. There was a ton, so we just felt like there was more opportunities to get guys that we had valued in round 5 and 6 in the 7th round, just because the numbers suggested. So I think it's working with the premium positions, and it's also working with numbers. So you're going to prioritize throwing numbers at O-line, D-line, corner. But when you also notice that a position group, like say running back last year, is super deep, well, there's probably going to be guys that you have as 5th round talent, maybe even low 4, that are there in 7. So I think kind of just a matter of working through all the information that the board kind of explains to you.
I know this is a franchise quarterback contract offseason. Obviously, the guy who's paid next is always going to be the highest paid. Where do you guys see maybe reworking the deal with Pat, at some point, and where does that stand right now?
Yeah, I mean, we have a special relationship with him and his agent, and we're in constant communication, as you mentioned, Pete. I mean, it's one of those things, and I think Coach hinted on this his last press conference, where as soon as one guy gets done, it's kind of the blueprint and the model, and 2 years later, it's jumped and exceeded. And so, but I think that this organization and the relationship we have with Pat will always be working to make sure that we're doing right by everybody. And there'll be a couple more contracts that still have to get done, Burrow and Herbert. And once they do, I think kind of look at everything and assess where you are and what you can do, and take it from there.
Right, when you were kid in Mount Carmel, tracking all the football scouting the way you did, I'm curious how much you followed the NFL draft then and how you followed it.
Back then,
Yeah.
I mean, it was
caveman techniques.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun, and that was something that I think every kid looked forward to, and draft day and doing the mock drafts, and I think I told you guys before, we still look at mock drafts. I mean, who doesn't look at mock drafts? I mean, it's one of the best parts about this whole process here is logging online and checking out different mocks and who going where, and we have a lot of fun with it, and sparks a lot of debate, and kind of those who's going to go first and how many of a certain position will go in a certain round, and what have you. But that was a lot of fun, and my friends always remind me of it to this day. I like when we're on the clock and I get a text from a hometown friend telling me what to do. So that's always good.
From then till now, are you still a little amazed at what the draft has become in terms
Yeah.
of the space it occupies? And what's your sense of how it got to be that?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, Vahe, I don't know if I ever thought about it, but when you kind of throw that question out there, it's just absolutely amazing from where this has gone to now traveling all over across the country and allowing cities to put on, great performance. And I think it's cool because, not every city can have a Super Bowl just because of how big that is, but they can have a part of this NFL experience with different things. And this draft is really cool. I think it's going to be really great for the kids. There's going to be a lot of kids that come out there and get to do a lot of cool things with the NFL, with they have in the outfields at the Play 60 thing or NFL experience. I mean, they're going to have the 40-yard dashes and all the rings. And, there'll certainly be a kid out there in the crowd today that will be either a player or be a front office member one day. And I think that they'll probably use this experience that the NFL has provided to really spark that interest.
Would you have gone to this if it were?
Oh, yeah.
Near you as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd been there all 3 days, and I would have been, trying to network to see if I can get tickets for sure.
Would you be the guy booing if the Chiefs drafted you?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Brett, I know teams are different when it comes to taking guys off the board, whether it's a character or an injury thing. One doctor might say, okay, one not. Taking those out of the equation, what round does it usually start where you're like, oh, we didn't have that. We would never take that guy. Like where teams start to spike in different directions, and somebody takes someone where you're like, oh, I can't believe where does that, not that I'm not saying you're demeaning the other team for doing it, but just for whatever reason, you start seeing guys come off the board that there was no chance you were going to take them.
Oh, I mean, it happens in round one. I mean, yeah, there'll be guys.
That you wouldn't take it all. Some
Yeah.
people will go in the first round and
Yeah.
be like, we wouldn't touch that.
Yeah.
Not character or injury, just.
Oh, just you mean just the
yeah, take
talent?
character and
Oh,
injury out of it.
I would say that I would say usually it gets every now and then there's maybe, I mean, and look, maybe teams say that about us, right? But I would say every year it definitely starts in the third round. But I would say for the most part, the first 50 guys are probably consensus guys. I think once you get past 50, there's a smaller deviation. But then once you get to the third round, it's all bets off. And there's guys that we have in the seventh round that go top of 3 and vice versa. So for sure the third round. And then every year there's always probably a couple, guys that we probably have in 3 or 4 going 2, early 2 or something like that. That happens. I don't think it's a rarity. And like I said, I'm sure there's guys that we probably drafted in the second or third rounds that teams had lower. So I would just say from a volume standpoint, I think you really start to see it starting with the third round. You'll get some curveballs here or there in rounds 1 or 2, but I mean, the numbers aren't super high.
Brett,
We're
just
going
going
to
to
work.
And plus, real quick with that, I think it may have been more likely back in the day, but now with social media and all the mocks and there's no secrets anymore. And some guys that you think this guy's going to be a steal here in 3, it's like by the time the whole process ends, it's consensus across social media that this guy's going in 1. And so I think, and maybe it doesn't necessarily mean a guy jumps from 3 to 1, but I mean, the guy's not a sleeper or what have you, or a small school guy. There's just so much coverage on every aspect of this. I mean, the pro days get live, networks coming down there doing live feeds. So there's not a lot of secrets. So it's been less over the years.
Yeah, Brett, whenever you're deciding between potentially trading up for a player, what intangibles or characteristics so you really want to have boxes checked to make that move?
Well, I think it's just the intangibles and the characteristics. I think all that is done as we're setting the board. And in regards to, on the aggressive scale, how aggressive we are, it's just how we feel about that player. But the player and the values are, that's part of, the makeup, the versatility, the character, the work ethic, that all encapsulates, what we feel about this player and where he is. And then once he's locked in on that board, if he's in that range and we're in a zone where we think we can't get him or he won't make it to us, that determines kind of, our aggressiveness or our level of aggressiveness.
Brett, Sam asked you a minute ago about wide receiver in general, but Kadarius Toney, what are your expectations for him? What do you think his ceiling is, maybe this year at least?
Yeah, I mean, he's down there with Pat. He's one of these guys that we're down there throwing. I mean, talent-wise, it's up there. I mean, he's really good. I mean, he can do anything. He's predominantly been a guy that is a slot receiver, returner, runner, gadget guy, if you will. But I don't know if there's a limit on his game because he has a vertical game. I think we've seen it just a little in the Jacksonville game, the regular season Jacksonville game. His time in college, I don't know if they were a team that pushed the ball vertically down the field. And then his time early on in New York, I don't know if they were a team that really vertically pushed the ball down the field. So, I mean, it's a fair question to say, has he ever played with a quarterback that likes to push the ball down the field? Now, we got him in here middle of the season, and so there's only so much you can do with him. But I don't think he's limited to a specific role, and it'll just be a matter of, like it is with all these players, just staying healthy and getting through camp. He's extremely smart, though, so it's not going to be anything grasping ideas or concepts. I mean, this kid is really smart. We were surprised by how quickly he picked up. I mean, some guys it takes a year or 2, but I mean, now we condensed it because we were in the middle of the season. There's only so much you can do and get him on board with, but he picked up that stuff really easy. So, I mean, listen, we have a lot of high hopes for him. I mean, he was a first round pick for a reason. There's a reason why we traded him, and we felt like he was first round talent. So, I think if he stays healthy and continues to just build that chemistry with the coaching staff and with Pat, which I think he's doing a great job at, I think the sky's the limit for him.
Brett, one of the last steps is the pre-draft visits, bringing guys in. I know sometimes it's for medical or for obviously answers that you want to give, but what do those visits do for you guys in terms of maybe that swings a guy closer up the board, or obviously you might have an answer where you sort of take him off the board? Can you generally go through why that last step is needed?
Yeah, and Nate, I think the first part you hit on most of these guys we bring in, they weren't invited to the combine. The great part about the combine is you get to interview the guys, you get to work them out. But I mean, they go through pretty extensive medical. The guys that don't get invited, you don't really have anything. You don't have any updated imaging on them or MRIs, X-rays, what have you. So all these guys that we think are draftable prospects, I think first let's bring them in. But then there's also a handful of guys that we liked and maybe we just didn't get a great first impression on when we met with them at the combine. So we like to spend that time to just cross our T's and dot our I's. And there's been times where we bring guys in and we weren't comfortable with them the pre-combine process. We weren't comfortable with the combine, but we like to tape so much. Let's just make sure one more time. And it usually just kind of solidifies that thought. But there's times I think I'm trying to think. I think Jalen Watson last year, he was a guy that I think that we met at the combine and we weren't sure that this would be a great fit. But we liked him and we wanted to bring him back in. I think we had the combine medical on him already, but he was a guy that we brought back into the facility last year. And both my staff and the coaches kind of did a 180 on him. Like, this kid you take him out of that combine environment, he had a chance to kind of just relax. And, he's been through a lot in his career trajectory, but that was a great example there where I don't think we were comfortable drafting him in any round after the combine. And we brought him in here. And I mean, it was just a completely different story. We fell in love with the kid and we were super excited to draft him, and he's done a great job for us. So, I mean, it's one of those things, just let's be sure on the guys that you like. And it can go in both ways. It could maybe potentially take a guy off the board, but also could put a guy back on the board.
Well, with what happened to the 49ers in the playoffs with their quarterback situation that I don't recall ever happening, do you think that that's going to cause, or you'll see more GMs looking at handling that position differently?
Potentially. I think that they're always going to work. And I think this was brought up at the owners meeting, and Coach Shanahan talked about it, and potentially down the line of having the ability to elevate a practice squad player. So I think one of the things that was being discussed is if teams that carry two quarterbacks, they're going to have a practice squad guy that is dressed game day. And if there is an emergency where both quarterbacks can't come in, that you can elevate a third quarterback. I think there'll be a lot of league discussions about that. I certainly don't think that that's a position that the league wants teams to be in. I think teams are going to formulate their roster, though. I don't think that, and I think Kyle said this at the owners meetings, I think that if you have a really good fourth running back or fifth tight end, you're not going to keep running backs. You're not going to keep another quarterback just on the thought of a once in a shot in the moon here, like what happened with the Niners. I think Kyle was right in saying that teams aren't going to formulate it. I mean, they're going to put their roster together to give them the best advantage, week in and week out. And I don't think, the thought of losing two quarterbacks in the same game is something that probably coaches or GMs they're probably going to just go against the percentages of that happening. So I think teams will continue to do what's best. Now, listen, if you have a good young prospect that you want, like, for example, you have a veteran, but you have a good young prospect. We were like that last year, where thought it could be Chad Henne's last year and weren't sure, but we think Shane has a lot of developmental upside. So you keep those guys, but teams that just have a clear-cut 1 and 2, I don't think teams are just going to start keeping third quarterbacks and cutting a really potentially like a Najee Johnson last year or Cochran last year. I think teams are going to keep those guys and think they can be players. So, but I do think, though, that's at the league level now. And I'm sure that this will be something that's on their radar, and it could get worked out with something as simple as just a practice squad player being able to suit up and be ready if needed.
PJ. Brett, y'all brought a number of guys back from last season. Have there been any talk with Jarek, and kind of what's the plan for the running back going forward?
Yeah, I think there has been some talk with Jarek, and he's certainly a guy that we love and greatly admire. And I think this follows a similar trajectory as last year, where I think Jarek just likes to take his time and make sure that he's ready to go, both physically and mentally. And I think the timeline last year was right after the draft where we were able to get with him. So I think once we get past next weekend, I think we'll double up with a lot of these guys that might still have a chance to be on this roster.
Todd, last question. I was just curious if you could take me inside the process, because you guys are used to drafting late in the first round, right? So you're at the mercy of the other teams. When do you start laying the groundwork for conversations with other GMs about, can I get up to 15? Can I get up to 21 and that kind of stuff? And do you ever have to give assurances like, hey, do you have to tell them who you're going up for or anything like that? Like, just what's that conversation like when you're trying to move around?
Yeah, typically what we do is, like, for example, this year at 31, I think we'll find a range of, where we think we'd be comfortable moving up. We'll kind of highlight a few guys that we think if they fall to a certain point, they'd be worth it. And then we'll figure out, I mean, last year, for example, we moved from, I think it was 30 to 21 or 22. I don't know if it was a 3 and a 5 we gave up. So I think we started looking at those values, and the charts are never like completely accurate because some teams may be willing to take a little bit less. So I think what we do is we'll probably give or take 1 or 2 on each side. We'll get to a range. So call it 30 to 20. And then maybe from teams 18 to 30, we'll just call and say, prior to the draft, what would you be thinking on draft day if you were not comfortable with, or if, I shouldn't say not comfortable, but what would you be thinking on draft day if you wanted to move out of that pick? We like to have those conversations ahead of time so that teams aren't on the clock and then they're trying to tell you what you want. And then you're trying to say, well, you're using the Cowboy board, we're using the Cardinals board, and you're using the Detroit board. So like these teams all have different boards. And so we reach out and, like I said, we'll get, we'll touch base with the first, 10 teams, 12 teams in front of us. We'll, our guys will call their guys. We'll have a communication on who's using what board. And so that when we get to that pick, we've already had discussions with teams 18, 19, and 20, that if we get there, they're using this board and this is what they would want. And this is what we can expect if we wanted that. So it's not like trying to figure out, again, what board and exactly the numerical count they're using, because then, I mean, things happen quickly here. So you have to be prepared. So we do a lot of this on the back end. And usually that's most of the time we spend Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays before the draft, just making sure that teams know that we're interested, either trading up or trading back. And we know the teams that are interested in trading down, and we know exactly what they want and what board they're using.
And do you ever have to give the assurances about like, hey, we won't take this player or anything like that?
No, because I think if a team wants a player, they're going to take him regardless. We just want to know if they're interested in moving back, what they want, and ahead of time. So again, like, we're not having this debate on, whose chart's right and why we're using this chart. Like, let's just get that out of the way early and know what we're dealing with.
Last one. Brett noticed your T-shirt. Can you tell us about what it's all about?
Oh yeah. So I was joking with Ted. My son does some doodle arting. I guess it's called doodle art. I guess that's the big thing with the young kids now. So they did that in school, and I kind of joked with them one day. This was a black and white print, and I joked with him one day. I said, that'd be really cool. And Mom kind of said, Dad should wear that next time he does press. So needless to say, they had the T-shirt waiting for me before I left today. So I figured I had to rock it today for a little support. Good luck.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.